My name is Paul Judge. I'm with Barracuda Networks. What we are spending some time today talking about is what we've been seeing with user behavior on Twitter and other search engines and social networks. And the goal of the work is to really look at, are there ways to identify the bad actors, not based on their particular attack, but based on their behavior beforehand. And you kind of look at kind of what that means. You know, one way to do that is to say, okay, there are certain parts of the web that are bad. There are certain domains that are bad. And so we shouldn't have people go there. One of the problems is, we have so many domains nowadays that are shared by hundreds of millions of users. Right, so we used to have this ability to do this domain level trust, right? We told the users, hey, just look for the lock at the bottom of the browser, everything's fine, right? But with Facebook, with Twitter, with 100 million, 500 million users behind a domain, we have this problem with user-generated content. Is that user real? Is that user fake? So that's really this goal of how do I create a reputation system to determine kind of who are the legitimate and illegitimate actors in these different communities online, and then use that to protect users. So I'm going to start off looking at Twitter. It's a pretty interesting example, one, because kind of the open API and kind of ease of account creation and querying made it easy for us to do our research. Also makes it easy for the attackers to kind of carry out their activity. So it's pretty well known that there's some bad stuff that happens on Twitter. Right, so here's some basic examples of, this is from a little while ago, but you look at trending topics, and these are 3 different accounts talking about 3 different trending topics, pointing to 3 different URLs. I mean, what they all had in common at the end of the day is they all pointed to this lovely server in China that was a distribution point for a rogue antivirus. So if you're on Twitter, you're looking for any of these trending topics, just searching, seeing what's going on in the world, you click on any of these particular accounts, you ended up being redirected to the server, and then you had this lovely decoration on your desktop. Right, so and there's several other examples. These are an example that the guys over at Arbor pointed out of someone using Twitter for command and control. So it's interesting that we know this activity is happening. There's a question of kind of what is the scale of it, and then are there things that we could do to identify these people and these accounts. So we set out on a study to really measure this and analyze this. And the goal was to kind of really measure and analyze the account behavior, also kind of model, well, what's normal user behavior? If we're going to figure out who the bad guys are, we need to know how to identify the good guys and kind of what their normal behavior is online, and then figure out are there particular features that can be strong indicators of legitimate or illegitimate use. So the methodology is pretty straightforward. It's something that is open that anyone can recreate. So we had access to a Twitter stream feed. So it gets about 5% of the traffic that's going across the network. Also, we use a couple API whitelisted accounts to do other ad hoc queries. We've been doing this work in one manner or another for the last 18 months or so. And so in our database, we were able to see things like this account's behavior. And for this work, we really focused on account behavior and intentionally excluded anything that was content-based. So this isn't about the content of the tweet. It's not even about the URL of the tweet or the profile. It's really about that account. How many people are they following? How many people are following them? How long have they been online? How many tweets have they sent? So similar to, if you look at other areas where people have attempted to kind of use these behavior-based features to tell you something about kind of the legitimacy of an account. I mean, one area is in social reputation. There was the Egan Trust System. You look at the email world, remember, I guess 7 years ago now, everyone was doing content-based email filtering. And then someone looked up and said, wait a second, there's only a handful of legitimate email senders, and there's all these IPs that are bad. I can use reputation to look at the behavior and figure out the bad guys. And the community started doing that, and we were blocking 10% based on IP. The next thing you know, we're blocking 90% based on IP. And it's still used today, and kind of the thing that in my mind kind of saved email. And so the goal is, can we do something similar for the social networks and for user reputation? And so one of the first things that we looked at is who uses Twitter in here? Got it? So, I mean, a normal Twitter user, you get online, there's only a few things you can do. You can tweet, you can follow someone, you can have someone follow you. So it's kind of 3 basic behaviors you can have. And so to kind of really raise your hand and say you use Twitter, you probably have, dozens of people that follow you, you follow dozens of people, you tweet, several times a week or a month or so forth. So one of the things that we looked at is, well, how many people that have Twitter accounts are actually normal Twitter users, or just even an average Twitter user? So we set the bar pretty low. And the bar was, if you follow at least 10 people, have 10 people that follow you, and you send at least 10 tweets, right? You've kind of used the thing. Well, what's interesting is only 29% of the accounts have even really used the thing, have what we call a true Twitter user. And our database right now consists of about 30 million Twitter accounts. So about a third or fourth of the entire ecosystem. So a pretty substantial subset or sample. So, that's just kind of one of the first observations that we made. So we then looked more detailed into how many people are following them. What's interesting is about 15% of the accounts have no one following them. It's even more interesting the people that are tweeting that have no one following them. It's kind of like talking to yourself. There's only a third of the system.
As long as you don't enter yourself.
There's only a third of the system that have more than 10 followers. So of all the people on Twitter that have accounts, only a third of the people there's at least 10 people that care to hear what you're talking about, right? So then if you look at kind of the universe, like what does that mean? Kind of you look at it overall, there would be, 16 people that have no followers. There's about half the people that have between 1 and 10 followers. And then there's very few people, there's basically 9% of the network that have over 100. So it just gives you kind of some basic understanding to begin with. And then we looked at the inverse of that, like how many people are you following? What's interesting again is about 19% of the people that have come online, created an account, never followed anyone. They came online, created an account, they never followed anyone. About half of the network, 45%, are following more than 10 people. But if you look at really how that lays out, you see here, like basically 1/5 of the network is following nobody. On the other extreme, there's about 1/10 of the network that's following at least 100 people. So we're going to use these properties as we move forward here. You look at the upper end of that, the people that are following more than 100 people, about 10% of the network. There's only 1% that are following more than 1,000 people. Anybody here follow more than 1,000 people? Okay. So it's interesting. The people that use it are the true Twitter users. About a third of them follow 100 people or more. But there's only this 1% of the network that decides, okay, I want information feed that's 1,000 people. So it's kind of overall, there's actually some people that decide on following over 10,000 people, and they exercise the limits of the clients. So we looked at a few things based on those basic properties. One of the things that we looked at were looking at followers versus friends, and looking at the relationship between the two. You see some natural things here you would expect, like the soft limit on having 2,000 people that you're following before you have those many people following you. So you see kind of that limitation show up. But one of the interesting things to look at is the delta between how many people you're following, how many are following you. So what you see here, you can see the text, is the distribution, and to the right are the count of people that have more friends than people that are following, more people that are following them than people that are following. And then on the other side, you have the inverse. I mean, what we looked at is, if you look at the delta though, and we gave a spread of basically plus or minus 5. The point is that about half of the network are following the same number of people that are following them. So they're using it kind of like a true social network, like a two-way graph, like a LinkedIn or a Facebook, where there's not a distinction between, am I your friend, are you following me? It's a two-way relationship. So there's about half of the network that's using it in that traditional sense, plus or minus 5 friends. There's only 13% that have more followers. Those are kind of the celebrities, if you will. And we'll drill into that more in a second. But then there's about a third of the network that are using it more as an information feed to follow more people than are following them and kind of extract information from the network. So it's kind of consumers versus creators. But that's just the delta. One thing that we found interesting was to look at the ratio. So if you look at kind of not only are you following more people, but by how much are you following more people, or by how much do you have more friends? I mean, this is a distribution of it, but to kind of break it out into something that's a little easier to read. When you get into people that have more people that they're following, you get into some very extreme situations of, people that have 100 times more people that they're following. Versus when you look at kind of people that have more followers, you have a very kind of small subset of people that have 100 times more followers. So one of the next features, and we'll tie these all together here in a second, but one of the next features we looked at was kind of how many tweets someone has sent. And I mean, this is a graph of how many tweets. I mean, one interesting thing is over 60%, about 60% of the network have never sent more than 5 tweets. Right? Out of all the people that are on the network, the hundreds of millions of people you hear about on Twitter and all the excitement of it, a very few people that have actually used the thing more than 5 times to send 5 tweets. But you know, the number of tweets is only so interesting because it doesn't take into account the age of the account. So another thing we'll look at here in a second is the actual tweet number of how many times you tweet a day on average. But before we get into that, I want to get a measure of kind of how much malicious activity was happening. How much malicious or suspicious or otherwise kind of activity that was against the terms. And so we came up with this thought of the Twitter crime rate. And the Twitter crime rate, as you can see here, really the number of accounts that are created every month that are then suspended by Twitter. So that doesn't mean people that came online and created an account and then decide to delete it themselves. These are people that created an account and then Twitter suspended their account. And so we went back and we wanted to measure this over time. But one of the first things that we looked at was first the actual growth of Twitter over time. And so this what you see to the top left here is the account creation relative since the beginning of the network, since 2006. And you see the spike at this time period that is the end of 2008 to beginning of 2009. You see the user growth increase rapidly. Well, what happened there is this point of time that we call the red carpet era. But basically, all the celebrities came. So basically, between November of 2008 and April of 2009, over half of the top 100 people that are on Twitter today, I mean, these are the Kim Kardashians, the Puff Daddies, Al Gore, Ashton Kutcher, 50s. I mean, just every celebrity from politics to music to film came in the same 6-month period, over half of them. So if you look at the list of top 100 users on a Twitter today, there's this 6-month period where they came. And what happened in that time is the growth rate increased. The growth rate went from about 2% growth rate to 20% growth rate. And so what happened right after that is, as you would expect, the crime rate increased, or the number of accounts that were coming online that were doing malicious activity increased. So if you look back from the beginning of the network, even in 2006, 1% of the accounts that were created every month on Twitter were suspended. You know, that increased to about 1.7% in 2007, increased to about 2% in 2008. But if you look at this red carpet era, it increased from 2 to 3% during the red carpet era, and then tripled from 3 to 12% in the 4 months after that. So just kind of what we all know to be true, kind of wherever the users come, the attackers come right behind it. So this was a measure, and again, this is only the accounts that Twitter was able to identify as doing malicious activity and block. So this doesn't count kind of all the other accounts that were doing things that were not been able to be detected. So this looks at from 2006 to the end of 2009. Here's a view of this year. And what you see is it's ranged from about 1% to a little over 2%. It's averaged about 1.6% this year, the crime rate. So out of every account that's created in any given month, there's basically about 1 in every 60 of those is suspended and kicked off. If you look at all the accounts that are created every day. And again, these are only the ones that are being detected. So one thing we want to look at is, okay, let's look at the properties of those suspended accounts. Let's look at how those properties compare to legitimate accounts. So one of the first things that we compared is the friend and follower delta. Remember the difference between how many people care to hear what you say and how many people you're following. So the red is the suspended accounts, the green are the legitimate or unsuspended accounts. And I mean, what you see is the suspended accounts obviously have a much larger delta. Remember we talked about that middle ground where people are actually using it as a social network, that 55% that had a two-way relationship. What you see is, you look at the edges, the suspended accounts have much more of a delta. They're going to 2 different extremes. I mean, one extreme is they have more people they're following, and then the other extreme is they have more people that are following them. And there's a reason for this. One is really their aggressive follower acquisition strategies. Right? You've seen accounts that come online, and in order to collect followers, they go and they follow lots of people. Right? So they go and they create an account, and all of a sudden it's following 1,000 people. And they wait on people to follow them back. And if you don't follow them back in time, they unfollow you and keep moving to follow more people, trying to stay under that threshold of 2,000 before they can go beyond that. So what you see is people building these accounts and trying to ramp up the number of people they're following in exchange to try to get more people following them.